I could sit here and tell stories about Nick and try and show why I think he's a Palmer-esque kind of a person in this game, but I'll never look at that 50-foot eagle putt again without thinking about a few years back at a US Open. I was on the practice putting green. Adam Scott was there, Justin Rose were there, a few guys were there. All of a sudden, they started running across the green, jumping up in the air and doing that. And I looked over, and he had just walked out onto the green. They were all teasing him about his reaction to that putt right there. What is it about you and the younger players that you just seem to bond so well with them? Whether it's
I just wish I was young again. No, I think as you get a little older, a lot of those guys, obviously, I played with when they started out, and Jack Nicklaus and Arnold, who were great models for me. And when I first played with them, they treated me as equals, which I never forgot. And so that instills a lot of respect, I think, just from the get-go. So that's one of the things I try to do when I played with younger players was to try and help them along. If they were nice enough kids, I'd always try and just treat them as an equal. And I think that's one of the reasons, but I learned that. It's not something that you just are given.
Well, and they certainly embraced you, whether it's as the captain of the team or just a colleague as far as they're concerned out there. It's something that I see week in and week out. But let's go back a little bit further, talk a bit about family. Dick mentioned that your dad passed when you were only 10 years old, and that impacted how you set your golf schedule later on in life as far as your kids were concerned. Can you tell us a bit, after you've won the PGA Championship, the Open Championship, you're in the meat of your competitive career, but you stopped playing majors?
Well, it's funny, when my kids were growing up, every summer, June was, so they finished school in end of May, beginning of June. And, June was the US Open, July was the British Open, and August was the PGA. And that was our summer. We may have a week off here and there, but when you're flat out on tour and, the majors are ticking away, that's what we did. And so we were sitting around at the breakfast table or the dinner table one night, and my son said, "What are we doing for summer?" And I said, "Well, we're going here and we're going here." And he said, "That's not much of a holiday for me." I think he was about 11. And, it was like you couldn't have slapped me in the face harder. And it just brought up a reality, that, this wasn't really a holiday to them going to another hotel or another golf course. So that night, my wife and I were talking about it, and I said, I'm going to have to start giving up some time for the kids because they're not going to be with us much longer. They get off to college, and also obviously what had happened, I never got to know my dad really well, which my mom and my brothers were fantastic, and that's what happens. I think when you lose a family member, it brings you all very close. And I was fortunate that I had such great family. But so that right around 2004, I started skipping the PGA. And of course, the PGA of America were really upset with me because, I'd won twice. And I just said to them, "I'm sorry, but this is more important to me." So I would play the British Open, and then we would take a month off. And a couple of times I took the British Open off and then played the PGA. But to me, that was really important. And, to this day, we used to go down to Mexico for our summer holiday, and I think our kids, as long as they live, they'll always remember the summer holidays in Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of guys talk about it and say how important the family is. I don't know of many that actually live it that way. Though your son, Gregory, may have cost you a major championship back in 1991. You want to tell about that?
I was playing pretty well then, and Greg was due the week before the PGA on like the Thursday, and anyway, Sue went to the doctor on Tuesday of that week, and there was, nothing was going on. So then she went on the week on Friday and nothing, and then Monday, and then eventually the doctor said, we're going to have to induce, probably around Friday. So Squeak, my caddy, who at the time was up at Crooked Stick, and he'd already worked on the golf course and paced everything off, and he phoned me up. He said, "What's going on?" I said, "Squeak, I can't go. I have to be there for the birth of my kids, and especially for the first one." And so he didn't understand. He's, man, you're playing so well or whatever. And so anyway, there's a story to that. I'll tell you in a little bit. So anyway, next thing I know, we just got those phones in the cars, if you remember. And John Daly called me up. He said, hey, Nick, what's going on? I said, well, I had to withdraw. He says, well, I'm on my way up to Crooked Stick. So I said, please. I said, just, if you haven't got a caddy, please take Squeak. Because he's been up there, and I feel so bad. You know, well, the rest is history. John Daly ended up winning the PGA. And Squeak phoned me Sunday night. I said, please don't tell me you're going to go and work for him full time now. But in the interim, I got on the Saturday, my wife gave birth to our son, Greg, which was, you know, anyone's a parent who is a parent will know that's a great day in a person's life, and especially a man's life.
So you should know Squeaky did not go work for Daly, but two of the next 3 PGA championships were won by Nick Price. Those were his first 2 major championships, actually the Open Championship in there as well.
We were trying to figure out who had the right, you know, Squeak or the players. You know.
Now, coming up in Rhodesia, South Africa, getting on the European tour and getting on the world stage must have been a difficult endeavor early on. How difficult was it for you to become a worldwide golfer?
Well, you know, we didn't, in those days, there were very few people making money out the game. I know this sounds really strange, but, you know, it was only in sort of like the mid-'80s when you had probably maybe 100+ people playing professional golf outside of the US who made money out of the game. If you were single and, you know, you were looking forward to, you know, look into the future, having a wife and kids, a lot of times guys who were sort of marginal players had to quit because you couldn't survive. You couldn't support a wife and kids. So you'd get out and go other jobs. So, but I was lucky. I got right at that time where money was starting to improve, especially in Europe. And then, you know, I came over here in '82, and I was lucky enough to play well in my first year. And it was funny because I think my entire career up until that stage, I'd probably made about, so I turned pro in October of '77, and I won the World Series over here in 1983 in August. And I won $100,000. And I think up until that time, I'd probably won a total of about $220,000. So when I won that $100,000 check, I wanted to retire. I thought I'd hit the jackpot here, you know, I could have bought a farm or whatever and gone and lived. But so money was tight for us. And, you know, there were a couple of times where I nearly ran out. And it wasn't the kind of thing, you know, I didn't know a lot of people who, you know, who I could go to and say, could you loan me money? Because if you didn't make it, you basically went home and worked until you made up enough money or saved up enough money to go back out. So that was a lot of motivation because my family had a very small clothing business, CMT, the manufacturing, and I worked in that when I was a kid to make pocket money. And I vowed after about 2 or 3 weeks of working in that, I was never going to do that. So there was a lot of motivation. And then 2 years in the military also helped me to motivate me.
You mentioned close. How close were you to having to go back home and work back home?
The one tournament I went down, and Simon Hobday, who maybe many may know, but was a very, very close friend of mine and actually was a mentor. He was like a father and also like a brother to me. I traveled with him, but he passed away a couple of weeks back, which was very sad. But he would always, if I was short, would have loaned me a couple £100 here and there, you know, and I always had that in the back of my mind, but I went to a tournament in Jersey, in the Channel Islands in England, and I had £180 in my pocket, and each week cost about £220. So I had a £40 deficit, which I knew I was going to have to go and in those days, you know, you carried your own bag or you pulled your own trolley. We didn't even have caddies. We couldn't afford them. And I finished 5th in the tournament, made £550, and I never looked back. So I was really lucky.
Let's hear it for Jersey. You mentioned Simon Hobday. Obviously, he's very close to you. Anyone who knew of Simon Hobday or Simon Hobday, there are just tons of stories. He was an individual, one-of-a-kind kind of a guy. Do you have a quick Simon?
Well, you know, he was 17 years older than I am, and I used to, when I was first starting to learn the game, I was about 13 or 14, I went to the practice tee, and he was beaten away there, and he had this beautiful golf swing. In fact, there's a lot of similarities between our golf swings. We're both pretty short, pretty quick, which I learned a lot from him. So anyway, I'm on the practice tee there, and I said, Mr. Hobday, can I watch you hit balls? And he said, sure. So he said, go and sit over there. So I sat down, and he was hitting balls, and beautiful. In those days, the caddies were shagging balls, and caddy was walking all around the bag, picking these balls up. His shot pattern was so tight. And eventually, I said to him at the end of the day, after I'd watched him hit 3 or 4 bags of balls, I said, how do you become a good player? And he pointed to the middle of the club. There's a typical Hobdayism. Pointed to the middle of the club and said, if you hit it out of here more than your opponent, eventually you're going to beat him, which is absolutely right. Anyway, fast forward to about 1979. So that was 9 years later. I get to travel with him on the European tour. And in my country, he was a legend. Trust me, this guy had more stories about him. In fact, most of us were amazed that he lived to 76 because he lived a great life. And he drank a lot of beer, smoked a lot of cigarettes, and he was a fantastic human being and loved every minute of life. But so when I got back home, I traveled with him for 5.5 months, slept in, we shared rooms in those days. We didn't have enough money to have our own room. And we called it the Hobday's tours. I was on Hobday's tours, which were a little bit rough at times, and you had to take trains and whatever because he hadn't thought about it, but I was following his lead. So when I got back home, if you can just imagine this, he never took his clothes out the suitcase. So when he got ready to play golf, he would wake up in the morning and pull a pair of pants out, and then pull out a shirt and a sweater, and they may be a hideous color combination. And you'd say to him, Simon, how can you wear those clothes? He says, first out the suitcase wins. That was his philosophy. But he couldn't sleep. It was terrible. The guy couldn't sleep, and he would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and he'd smoke a pack of cigarettes before I woke up. It was unbelievable. Anyway, so when I got back home, all of my friends, they didn't believe that I'd actually traveled with Hobday. And they said, really? I said, 5 months I was with the guy. She said, well, what was it like? I said, it was a real experience. It was an eye-opener. I said, well, what did you learn, being with Hobday? I said, I learned a very valuable lesson. I said, if I'm ever going to be successful as a professional golfer, I've got to do everything totally opposite to him. But he's such a great friend, and he taught me a lot about the game.
I was running a tournament in Scottsdale, Arizona called The Tradition, and he was playing in The Tradition, being a former U.S. Senior Open winner. And we had decided to go to a cheaper security company than the local police, which was not a good idea because the police decided they would stake guys out for speeding tickets on the side of the road on the way up to Desert Mountain. So it was not a great mistake by this cost cutter as I went out west. In any case, supposedly, Hobday, late for a tee time, coming up Pima Road, blows by an officer at like 80 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. Officer finally catches up to him, pulls him over, sidles, you know the story, sidles up to the window, has him roll down the window and says, boy, I've been waiting for you all day. Simon said,
well, I got here as fast as I could. That's a true story.
True story.
True story, yeah.
True story.
The other one I loved was he played golf with his bank manager every week when he was at home, and his bank manager phones up one day and he says, hey, Simon, it's Bob here. He says, hey, Bob, what's up? He says, Simon, I got to tell you, you overdrawn in your bank account this month by $2,500. Simon says, so? So the bank manager says, what are you going to do about it? He says, no, have a look. How was I this time last month? So the guy says, no, I'll look at your ledger, and he pages through. He said, no, this time last month you were fine. You had $4,800 in there. He said, did I phone you?
Typical Hobday. So Simon is not the only character.
Yeah.
Not the only character from your part of the world. You had an assistant captain, a vice captain on your President's Cup team, Tony Johnston.
Yeah, my favorite story. Honestly, it's so hard to explain to people the characters that you meet when you're on tour. Australians, New Zealanders, guys from Japan, the South Americans, guys just from all walks of life. And you get to spend time in the locker room, you go for dinners with them and whatever. And one of my favorite people was one of the guys I grew up with, Tony Johnson, who very, very smart guy, speaks 3 languages fluently, passed everything with straight A's at university and high school and whatever. I mean, the guy, he's too smart to be a golfer. But anyway, I heard this story, and I phoned him the next morning after I heard this story just to find out if it was true. But toward the end of Seve's career, in like 99, 2000, he was starting to lose his game a little bit. And he was playing in the Madrid Open in Spain with Tony Johnson. And Seve always was a phenomenal competitor, but he had a habit of being able to intimidate rules officials. And, he'd sort of look up there and, rules official would come over to a guy and say, what's the problem? And the player would say, well, I think I need a drop here because this is, and then the rules official would look around and say, yeah, or no, it's not. When the rules official came to Seve would just say, well, so where do I drop? He didn't even question, was it GUR or whatever. So anyway, Tony was well aware of this. So anyway, they play in the 16th hole as the last round, and they both have a chance to win if they play the last 3 holes well. And they get to this par 4, and they drive over the hill, and Seve was always a little longer off the tee than Tony. And they got up there, and there were 2 balls in the fairway, one just about a yard in, and there was another one about 3 yards in, about 12 yards further. So Tony walked to the shorter ball there, and this ball is in a divot. It's in a divot this deep that some guy's just taken a wedge and didn't put his divot back in. So anyway, he looks around there like this, and eventually he calls Seve. He says, Seve, come here. So Seve comes over there, and he says, there's a sprinkler over here, and I'll get up and stand. And the ball was over there, and he says, Seve, if I stand like this, he says, can I get a drop? And Seve goes, no drop. So he says, how about if I stand like this? And there, can I get a drop? Seve says, no drop. Ovi says, good, this is your ball. Yeah. This is a great, true story, another true story.
True story. And I don't know what it is about Nick Price, but all the fun guys that you meet, the funnest guys in the gallery or the most fun guys in the clubhouse are all waiting around to see Nick Price, spend some time with him, trade jokes, get on his little email chain of fun jokes. But let's talk. We've spoken a bit about Arnold tonight. Dick certainly did, and we all, I know, have an attachment to him, whether we met him in person, lucky enough to do that, or through television. What was your recollection or your favorite moment, let's say, with?
So one of my best friends lived around the corner from me back home. They had a swimming pool. We didn't. I used to go over there and swim at his place, and his dad just got Arnold Palmer's record. So the first time I heard Arnold Palmer was on this record, going out about the grip, and, Arnold had this resonating voice, which, it was just amazing. Anyway, I borrowed the record, and had the instruction thing in the middle there, and it was what one of the sort of huge things that I learned about in golf was what Arnold was showing and talking about. Anyway, fast forward, I get to the British Open in 1978, and some friends of mine, George and Brenda Bloomberg, were there, and they were sitting having lunch with Arnold. And so they called me over, and it's like I could have met a president of the United States or the Queen or a king. I wouldn't have been as nervous as I was there. I was absolutely, it was tough. Anyway, he was as nice as could be, shook my hand, looked me in the eye, asked me how I was playing and whatever. And that set a precedent. I don't need to tell, Dick knows, and many of you know here, that Arnold was the most personable. He just made everyone feel comfortable. He made everyone feel special. And, he was very kind. And when I applied for my green card, first person I went to was to Arnold, because I thought that if someone's in the immigration department and they read this letter, it's going to make a difference. And it did. It did. So Arnold always used to say, you got to thank me for getting into this country. So he was great. And Winnie was also a great friend of ours. And we lived in Orlando for 10 years and got to know them really well. So, we're going to miss him. His presence was always around at Augusta, or everywhere we went, when we played on the tour. So, but I'm just, like I said to Dick earlier, I think we're just fortunate, very fortunate to have known the man. He was very special.
You mentioned Augusta. You shot 62 and a half at Augusta, the lowest round, close to the lowest round of all time. Tell us about that final hole. The first man ever to shoot, the only man ever to shoot 63 at Augusta with a wooden-headed club is Nick Price. But that horseshoe, boy, I still think it's going down.
Well, there was a little bit of pent-up frustration getting into that Saturday because I'd missed the cut my first one. This was my second Augusta, and I shot 78 the first day, and honestly, I played from tee to green as well as I could, but growing up back home in Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, our greens were more like your tees than they were, Augusta's greens were a nightmare to me. They were so fast. And I walked off, I think I had 6 3-putts that day. I walked off, and David Ledbetter and I, who'd worked together for so long, I looked him straight in the eye and said, I don't think I can ever play this golf course. This thing's just beaten me today. And he said, just go to the putting green. So we went to the putting green and we worked a little bit. And the next day I went out and I shot 68, 69, made the cut. And, it was great. I didn't think I was going to make the cut after shooting 78. And so arrived at the golf course on Saturday. I was still hitting the ball really well, and drove it in the bunker on the first hole, made bogey. I thought, oh, here we go. I'm going to shoot another 78 and end up last, which nobody ever wanted to, finish last at any major. Anyway, I just went on this birdie surge. I birdied 2, birdied 5, birdied 6, birdied 8, turned in 33, and then birdied 10, 11, and 12. 10, 11, 12, and 13. Which, if anyone ever played that golf course, there wasn't any wind, but it's still pretty strong to do that. And then we're walking up 14, and I'm 7 under par. And my caddy at the time was David McNeely, a guy from Ireland, and he said, you know what the course record is? And I said, yes, I do. Yes, I do. And normally when a caddy says that to you, he's putting the kiss of death on you. But anyway, I birdied 15 and then birdied 16 and got to 9 under. And then the last 2 holes, I had 2 really good birdie chances. But I was asked by the press after that putt horseshoe on 18, did about a 450, went all the way around and came back on itself. And one of the press guys said, well, what happened with that putt? I said, I think Bobby Jones's hand came up and said, that's enough for today.
So that was a heck of a Saturday. Sunday was a terrific Sunday as well. Who ended up winning that tournament?
Jack. That was one of the greatest theaters I've ever been in golf in my life. Augusta has this incredible arena, amphitheater, whatever you want to say, kind of a feel to it. And one of the greatest things was when you got in on Sunday, when you got to the 10th tee, if you were within 5 or 6 shots of the lead, you can win there because the leaders can make a couple of mistakes with all the water and whatever. And if you play really well, and Jack did it that day, well, I can tell you that the noise and the roars around there, you could identify each roar. Greg Norman and I were playing in the last group, and we got to 13T, and we looked back down, and normally, especially if you're in the last group, the fans are just lined up down that fairway, all the way around. I think there were about 30 people because they'd all gone ahead of us because we were doing okay, but of course all the action was ahead of us. And on the 15th hole, we hit our tee shots, and as I was walking past the 17th green, Jack was putting. And when that ball went in, that's the loudest roar I've ever heard in my life on a golf course. It was so loud. And then, one of the big things at Augusta, it says on the back of the ticket, patrons must refrain from running in disorderly conduct on the golf course. Well, let me tell you, if you'd seen that crowd, they ran across everything, trying to get to 18, ran around the trees and up there. I mean, it was just amazing. It was a fantastic day. And Sandy Lyle, who played with Jack, I saw him in the locker room afterwards, and he said, I don't think I'll ever experience anything like that in my life again, because he'd witnessed, Jack winning his 6th Masters and coming back from, at 46?
46 years old. Arnold and Jack, both President's Cup captains for the American side. You for your 3rd time on the international team. What has that competition meant to you as a player and now as a captain, and your chances as far as the team is concerned this year. They're not as strong on paper right now as they were in the last edition.
Well, it was really tough for us, all of us who weren't involved in the Ryder Cup, which was Greg Norman, VJ, myself, Ernie, Retief Goosen. You know, we wanted to be a part. The greatest thing is about professional golf and the Ryder Cup and the President's Cup is that we don't play for money. And so everyone seems to think that we as professionals are, you know, we're money hungry and we only want to participate if there's lots of money involved. Well, what we loved about watching the Ryder Cup was pure competition, where you had 12 guys playing against each other, or, you know, 24 guys, 2 teams playing against each other for no money. It was just about pride. And of course, it's the purest form of golf. It's match play. And we wanted to be a part of that. And Commissioner Fincham at the time approached Greg and myself and Ernie back in the early 90s and said, would you guys be interested? And so we were all excited about it, and so they formed the President's Cup. And it's a little different in many respects because, well, in a lot of respects, but it's the European Tour versus the American Tour is the Ryder Cup. So what are we? Well, it's the American Tour, the American players versus the rest of the world. It's kind of hard to get your guys motivated when you sort of, you know, you don't have something to play for. But in the last 5 or 6 years, I think the guys have cottoned on now. They understand that this is important for international golf. And if you look at where our team comes from, we got anywhere outside of Europe. So you've got the whole of Asia, you've got South America, South Africa, you know,
Canada. I mean,
it's a huge part of the world we draw from. So I think in the next 8 or 10 years, we're going to see the President's Cup really take off. It's important that we win one soon because it's been floundering a bit. But after what happened in Korea, where we lost by 1 point, the guys are fired up this year. And I think it's going to be a wonderful event at Liberty National, end of September. And all of you around here, you should get down there. Come and cheer for us a little bit, please. But no, it's going to be a great week, I know.
Well, you're not going to say so, and you probably won't even agree, but I'm telling you, as far as the players are concerned, when they play for Nick Price, for you being the captain of that team, not just the rules changes and the format changes that have made it a more competitive, more appropriate competition, where some players will be sitting on the side, you're able to choose your team instead of everyone playing every session. They really want to play for you and really want to win for you. We were talking earlier about the type of person that's out on the PGA Tour now. It seems, from my perspective, when my dad was playing in the mid-'60s, it was really a family with Arnold, Jack, etc. Yeah. There weren't many bad guys or guys out there that were out seemingly solely for themselves in a very individual sport. That maybe changed a little bit to a degree, let's say the Tiger era, something along those lines. Not the warmest of characters. I always worried that people who emulated Arnold, seemingly like you and a lot of the guys from that era, now the next generation is going to basically emulate the top guy, which is Tiger Woods. These guys nowadays don't, to me, seem like they're that way. What do they seem like to you?
Yeah, I think golf's in a very good place now with the guys that are up there now. Jordan Spieth, Rory McIlroy, Adam Scott, Jason Day, Dustin Johnson. These guys and a couple of the young South Africans, you know, Charles Schwartzel, Louis Oosthuizen, and Brendan Grace, who I play a lot of golf with. These guys respect the game. They respect the etiquette of the game. They respect their opponents. You know, one of the things you learn when you play golf, which is so different to any of the other sports that we play, when you first start playing golf, you're taught not to walk, not to talk while your opponent plays. You're taught to respect the golf course, replace your divots, clean up your bunkers, rake your bunkers, repair your ball mark. There aren't any other sports that get that kind of respect. So that in itself makes guys, youngsters, aware of their opponents. And then when you play the game, we all know how hard this game is. If a guy beats you by a shot, when you're young, sometimes you think, oh, the guy's lucky and whatever. But when you play the game a little bit more, you know that that guy's beaten you because he's played better than you have. And that's when you go and look that guy in the eye and you shake his hand. And that's the greatest thing about our game. And I don't think that's ever going to change. I really don't. I like what the USGA have done with the rules now, changing the rules, making them simpler. Because I think before you needed to be a Harvard law professor to understand, I don't know how many of you have read a rule book. It's about the most boring thing you've ever seen in your life. But, it's really important that the game is in good hands. And I think every generation needs to carry that responsibility of keeping the game sacrosanct and keeping it, really, really up on its pedestal where it belongs. No person is greater than the game, and no person never will be greater than the game.
So for a great stretch of time through the 70s up to the early 80s, you were trying to find your way in the game, became a worldwide superstar in the game, top golfer in the world, et cetera. Came out on the Champions Tour for a few years. What are you doing now? What's going on in your life? What do you like to do? What's fun for you?
I've often asked, because I basically stopped playing about 2 years ago now. And
we miss you.
Thank you. I miss being out there too in many ways, but when your game goes back a notch or two, and I honestly, I'm having so much fun and enjoying my life right now, and I miss playing golf at the level that I did, but I still love playing golf with my buddies. I just don't want to compete anymore. I got tired of waking up and putting a score on a card. That's the hardest thing. Every day is a test. That's one thing about golf. Every day you go out there is a test. You put that score on a card, it shows whether you've been working or whatever it is, and then if you're not playing well, all your buddies phone you, send you text messages, what the hell's wrong with you, So, well, I don't practice anymore. I'm allowed to shoot 74 every now and then. But my golf's done a full circle, It's...
They're jealous.
I know. But that's from the up tees now. I just turned 60.
No, it's not.
No, golf's fun. I've done the full circle now. You start off playing with your buds when you're young, and I didn't even have a full set of clubs. I think I had 6 or 7 clubs when I first started. And then you work your way up, and I was really lucky. I hit the heights that I did, and then you start working your way down, and you have fun still on the way down because you're still playing okay. But now I think I'm back at the bottom now, and I've gone back to playing golf with my buddies because I like having a spare ball in my pocket and a beer in the cart in case I need it. So it's good. And no scorecard.
Well, you've mentioned coming full circle as far as playing golf is concerned, but also in many ways tonight is full circle. Your mother took care of you after your dad passed when you were 10 years old, and now you get a chance to honor her with the $50,000.
If I can take 2 minutes, just explain about my mum. She lost her husband when she was 45, and she was left with 3 boys. My eldest brother at the time being 21, who then took over the reins of the business. My other brother was 7 years older than I was. But my mum was born in Wales, Barry Island, just outside of Cardiff. Grew up in the southwest of England, in Devon. And in 1939, went to nursing school in London. And she was there during the Blitz, which, if you ever want to talk to someone who went through that Blitz when they were bombing London, it was pretty scary. She spent more time down in the tube stations, than she was up. Every night they were down there, because these bombers kept coming. Anyway, from there she became a theatre sister and then left and went to India at the ripe old age of 20 years old. Met my dad out there, who was a major in the Indian Army. He was from England as well. They had my eldest brother there, 1946, and they were in Karachi when the uprising came, where Pakistan split, and when Pakistan became Pakistan. And they got on a train and went down to what is now Mumbai. And on the train was raided about 3 or 4 times. And they hid, managed to get out, and then got on a ship. And my dad was then sent to the Sudan as part of the army. And on the way over on the ship, the Sudan blew up. All the violence started there. So they stayed on the ship, went to Durban. Dad got off in Durban. And both my other brother and myself were born in Durban. And then we moved up to Rhodesia in 1961. and I lost my father in '65, and then my mom stayed on, and when I turned pro and left to go on my travels, she went back to England, and she got back to England in 1978, which was, 50, how many years was it? I don't know how many years, 35 years or something since she had left England. And so she got back to England, and she lived a great life. She died 2 years ago, but I want to thank you guys, first of all, for giving us that scholarship in her name, because that means a lot to me.
Finally, life has a lot of gray areas, things that are not necessarily for sure one way or the other. Of what are you most certain in your life?
What am I most certain of? I don't think anybody had more fun than I did, to be honest. I really don't. I think I did. I took time off. I went on holidays when I needed to, obviously with my kids, but also with myself, my wife and I, before we had kids. We lived life to the max. We had a great time. And, it's just all because I started hitting the ball around a little green pasture. It was, if I could tell you what it was like when I started playing, I had absolutely no idea that there was professional golf when I started playing. I didn't even know there were golf tournaments. And I only found out about professional golf when I was about 13 or 14, and then I didn't realize you could make money out of it. And then just to see the world the way I've done, and just in loving a game so much, I'm really grateful to this game of golf.
Well, certainly if
And
you
the
had
people
fun,
I've met.
everyone around you had fun as well, and tonight we got to spend time with some old friends in memory with Francis Ouimet and Arnold Palmer, and got to meet a new friend. A man just like the two of them, Nick Price, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Too long?
Nick, we'd like to present you with this memento for the evening. Couldn't have a better honoree. Again, thanks for coming.
That's great.
Appreciate
Thank you so
having you.
much. Thank you.